The scent of freshly laundered cotton and the low, rhythmic hum of the dryer were the soundtrack to my Tuesday afternoon. It was a peaceful sound, one I'd come to associate with the quiet order of a life well lived. 18 years of marriage, 2 wonderful kids, a home filled with warmth and the comfortable clutter of family. I traced the collar of my husband Dean's favorite blue button-down shirt, the fabric soft and worn under my fingertips. He wore this shirt for parent-teacher conferences, for our anniversary dinners, for the day he brought our son, Ryan, home from the hospital. It was a relic of our shared history, woven with memories. My name is Teresa McLean, and at 45 years old, I believed my life was a testament to the promises we'd made on our wedding day. Dean was a successful construction project manager, a man who built things from the ground up, not just buildings but our entire world. He was the provider, the rock. I worked part-time as a veterinary technician at a local animal clinic, a job that filled a part of my soul, even if Dean often complained about the modest income it provided. "It's a hobby, honey," he'd say with a patronizing smile, "not a career." He preferred when I stayed home full-time, managing the household and his needs, a role I had played for years before our children, Katie, now 16, and Ryan, 14, were old enough for me to reclaim a small piece of my professional independence. I insisted on keeping my job. It was my connection to a world outside the meticulously kept walls of our Tucson home, a world where I was more than just a wife and mother. Lately, though, a subtle dissonance had crept into our domestic harmony. Dean had been working longer hours, taking weekend trips for site inspections that left me feeling strangely adrift. When I'd question him, a flicker of irritation would cross his handsome face before being replaced by that now familiar look of gentle concern. "Teresa, you're getting so emotional lately," he'd say, his voice a soft caress. "Are you sure you're not just overwhelmed? Maybe this job is too much for you." He'd started making comments about my mood swings, my irrational behavior. It was always after I'd dared to challenge him, to ask for a piece of his time or an explanation for his absence. The words were a quiet poison, slowly making me question my own perceptions. That Tuesday afternoon in October, the kids were at school and the house was quiet. I was catching up on laundry, a mundane chore that usually brought me a sense of peace. As I folded the blue button down, I glanced over at Dean's side of the bed. His laptop sat open on the nightstand, its screen glowing. A message notification flashed across the screen, a brief preview of an email. From Harrison and Associates Legal. Subject: McLean strategy. The bipolar angle will hold up if she reacts the way we expect. My hands froze on the collar of his shirt. The fabric suddenly felt cold, alien. The words on the screen didn't compute. They were like a foreign language I couldn't decipher. Bipolar angle? React? A cold dread, sharp and icy, began to spread through my chest. Something about the word bipolar made my stomach clench. I'd never been diagnosed with anything like that. But Dean had been making comments lately about my mood swings. Every instinct told me to close the laptop, to pretend I'd never seen anything, to walk away and continue my normal Tuesday routine. Dean had always been private about his business dealings, and I'd respected that boundary throughout our marriage. But this felt different. This felt personal. The message preview had cut off after those chilling words, but I could see there were more emails in the thread. My heart hammered in my chest. The rational part of my mind screamed warnings, but the growing dread in my stomach demanded answers. My hands trembled as I set down the shirt I'd been folding. I walked to his nightstand. The polished wood cool beneath my fingertips. The cursor hovered over the email thread, a tiny, blinking arrow pointing toward the potential implosion of my life. I clicked. The email opened, and with it, a world I never knew existed. It wasn't just one email. It was a chain, a meticulously documented history of a betrayal so profound it stole the air from my lungs. And beneath it a folder labeled simply, "Exit Plan, Confidential." For the next hour, I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed we had shared for 18 years, and I scrolled through the methodical destruction of my life. My hands were steady now, a strange calm descending as the full scope of Dean's deception was laid bare. He had been planning this divorce for months, maybe longer. He'd been consulting with Harrison, a notoriously aggressive divorce attorney, since February. While I was making Valentine's Day dinner and planning our anniversary trip, he was building financial strategies and custody arguments. I saw emails detailing every argument we'd had, his words twisting my frustration into unhinged rage, my sadness into depressive episodes. I saw financial spreadsheets I'd never seen, accounts in his name only, money systematically siphoned from our joint assets over the past 2 years, nearly $200,000. There were receipts attached to emails for items I'd never purchased, charges I'd never made, all building a false narrative of financial irresponsibility to match the mental instability claim. The timeline showed he'd originally planned to file for divorce on December 15th, right before Christmas, when he thought I'd be at my most emotionally vulnerable. The calculated cruelty took my breath away. But as I read deeper into the files, I realized Dean's plan had a fatal flaw. He'd underestimated me completely. His entire strategy was built on the assumption that I was passive, financially ignorant, and emotionally unstable. He documented what he saw as evidence of my mental health issues, but reading his descriptions, I recognized something else entirely: the behavior of a woman who'd been systematically manipulated and gaslit for years. The more I read, the more I remembered. 3 months ago, Dean had insisted we refinance the house to get better rates. I'd signed the papers he put in front of me, trusting his expertise. Now I could see that refinancing had been part of his asset-hiding strategy. 2 months ago, he'd convinced me to close my individual savings account and combine everything into our joint account for better financial planning. That money had been quietly moved to an account I'd never seen. But Dean had made one crucial mistake. In his arrogance, he documented everything. Every lie, every manipulation, every cruel calculation was preserved in digital form. His own words would become the weapons I'd use to defend myself. Then I found the text messages. A thread between Dean and his lawyer. Harrison had written, "The bipolar diagnosis will be key. We need more documentation of erratic behavior. Can you provoke some incidents?" Dean's reply made my blood run cold. "Don't worry. She's too stupid to hide money properly. This pathetic cow will be living in a trailer when I'm done." I had to read it twice before the words sank in. Pathetic cow. That's how my husband of 18 years saw me. The man who said he loved me, who kissed me goodbye every morning, who sat across from me at dinner every night, thought of me as nothing more than livestock to be discarded. The cruelty was just the beginning. As I read through the files, a horrifying picture emerged. He was building a case to paint me as mentally unstable, documenting every argument, every moment of frustration, every time I'd raised my voice or shown emotion. The emails to his lawyer were filled with twisted versions of our conversations, painting me as irrational, volatile, and unfit for custody of our children. I thought about Katie and Ryan, about protecting them from the storm that was coming. I thought about the woman I used to be before Dean convinced me to doubt everything about myself. That woman was still here, buried under years of manipulation, but stronger for having survived it. Dean wanted a war. He was about to get one. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. A cold, hard clarity settled over me. I took out my phone and a flash drive I kept in my purse. Methodically, I copied every file in the exit plan folder. I screenshot every text message and documented every email exchange between Dean and Harrison. His own words, preserved in digital amber, became the evidence that would free me. I thought about calling Jennifer, my old college roommate, the one Dean had successfully isolated me from, claiming she was a bad influence who filled my head with feminist nonsense. I thought about calling my sister in California, whom I'd grown distant from after Dean's subtle campaign against her. But first, I needed legal advice. I needed someone Dean wouldn't expect, someone outside his network. That's when I remembered something from the files I'd read. In one of his frustrated emails, Harrison had mentioned a female attorney in Phoenix who'd given him trouble in a previous case. He'd called her ruthless and impossible to intimidate. Her name was Victoria Summers. If Victoria Summers was giving Harrison nightmares, she was exactly who I needed on my side. I scheduled the appointment under my maiden name, paying cash to keep it off our insurance records. Dean had taught me to be secretive, and now I was using those skills against him. That night, after Dean fell asleep beside me, I lay in the darkness, planning my next move. My first instinct was to gather evidence, but I had to be smart about it. Dean was clearly several steps ahead of me, which meant I needed to catch up quickly, without alerting him to what I knew. I couldn't let emotion drive my decisions, not when my children's future was at stake. The next morning, I waited until Dean left for work and the kids were at school before returning to his laptop. This time, I came prepared. The evidence was even more damning in daylight. Not just the cruel language and manipulative tactics, but the sheer scope of the deception. Dean had been planning this for over 8 months. Victoria Summers's office in Phoenix was nothing like the sterile, corporate spaces I'd expected. The walls were lined with law books and family photos, and Victoria herself was a striking woman in her 50s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. Before we began, Victoria said, her voice warm but professional, "I want you to know that everything you share with me is protected by attorney-client privilege. You're safe here." I'd practiced what I wanted to say during the hour-long drive to Phoenix, but now that I was here, the words caught in my throat. How do you explain that your entire marriage has been a lie? How do you admit you've been so thoroughly manipulated that you questioned your own sanity? "My husband is planning to divorce me," I finally said. "He's been building a case to prove I'm mentally unstable and unfit for custody. He wants to take everything, the house, the kids, our savings. And he thinks I'm too stupid to stop him." Victoria's expression didn't change, but I saw something sharpen in her eyes, a glint of steel. "Tell me everything," she said. For the next hour, I laid out Dean's plan in detail. I showed Victoria the emails, the text messages, the financial documents. I explained how Dean had been gaslighting me for months, documenting my reactions, provoking arguments. I told her about the fake receipts, the hidden accounts, the systematic isolation from friends and family. When I finished, Victoria leaned back in her chair. "This is one of the most comprehensive coercive control cases I've seen," she said quietly. "Your husband isn't just planning a divorce. He's planning to destroy you." "But he can't really prove I'm bipolar, can he?" I asked. "I've never been diagnosed with anything." Victoria's smile was predatory. "Teresa, your husband just handed us his entire playbook. Not only can we defend against his accusations, we can go on the offensive. What he's doing is called litigation abuse, and it's grounds for sanctions. The hidden assets alone could result in criminal charges." She pulled out a legal pad and started making notes. "First, we're going to get you evaluated by a forensic psychologist, someone who specializes in coercive control. They'll document the psychological abuse you've endured. Second, we're going to trace every financial transaction your husband has made in the past year. Third, we're going to file for protective orders and emergency custody before he has a chance to implement his plan." "Can we really do all that?" I asked, hardly daring to hope. "Teresa, your husband made a critical error." Victoria's voice was steel wrapped in silk. "He documented his intent to commit fraud and perjury. He put his plans in writing. Any judge who sees this evidence will be furious. By the time we're done, Dean won't know what hit him." As I drove back to Tucson, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. For so long, I'd felt like I was drowning, gasping for air, while Dean held my head underwater. Now, suddenly, I could breathe again. I had an ally, a plan, and most importantly, I had the truth. As October turned to November, I maintained my normal routine while secretly building our case. I was careful not to change my behavior in any way that might alert Dean to what I knew. I continued doing laundry, making dinner, asking about his day. But inside, I was a completely different person. The self-doubt was gone, replaced by cold determination. Dean had no idea his pathetic cow had grown fangs. The hardest part was protecting Katie and Ryan without alerting them to the crisis brewing in our home. I made sure all their important documents, birth certificates, social security cards, school records, were secured in a safety deposit box Dean didn't know about. I quietly arranged for them to spend Christmas break with my sister in California, framing it as a fun vacation rather than a strategic move to keep them out of the line of fire. Everything was falling into place. Dean's timeline showed he planned to file for divorce on December 15th, right before the holidays when he thought I'd be most vulnerable. What he didn't know was that I'd be ready for him. December 15th arrived with unseasonable warmth, the Arizona sun streaming through our kitchen windows as I made coffee and waited. Dean had been unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming while he got ready for work, probably anticipating the bombshell he planned to drop later. He kissed my forehead before leaving, just like he had every morning for 18 years, and told me he'd be working late again. At 2 p.m., the process server arrived at my veterinary clinic. My coworkers looked concerned as I signed for the papers, but I just smiled and said it was probably something related to Dean's construction work. I waited until I was alone to open the envelope, though I already knew what I'd find. The divorce petition was everything Victoria had predicted. Dean was seeking full custody of Katie and Ryan, based on my mental instability and erratic behavior. He claimed I'd been spending recklessly, depleting our savings, and creating a chaotic home environment. According to the document, he was requesting minimal spousal support due to limited financial resources and asking the court to consider my history of emotional outbursts when determining custody arrangements. Every allegation was exactly what we'd seen in his files. Every lie was perfectly crafted. Every manipulation was precisely what we'd prepared for. I called Victoria immediately. He filed. I said simply. "Perfect," she replied. "How are you feeling?" "Honestly, relieved. It's finally starting." That evening, Dean came home with flowers and Dean's famous concerned husband expression. He sat me down in our living room, took my hands in his, and delivered the performance of his life. "Teresa, honey, I need to talk to you about something difficult," he began. "I think our marriage is in trouble, and I believe you might need professional help. Your behavior lately has been concerning, and I'm worried about the kids." He was so convincing, so earnest, that for a moment I almost doubted my own memories. Then I remembered the text about being a pathetic cow and felt nothing but disgust. "You're absolutely right," I said, watching confusion flicker across his face. "I think I do need help. In fact, I've already started getting it." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for January 8th. Dean walked into the Pima County Courthouse that morning with Harrison at his side, both men radiating confidence. Dean wore his best suit and that charming smile that had won me over 20 years ago. He nodded respectfully to the judge, played the role of the concerned husband perfectly. Then Victoria entered the courtroom. I watched Dean's face change as he recognized her. Not immediately, but with growing horror as Harrison whispered urgently in his ear. This was the attorney who dismantled Harrison's previous cases, the one he'd called impossible to intimidate.
And she was representing me.
Victoria approached the bench with a thick binder, labeled, "Intent to Defraud and Coercive Control, Evidence Package A." She handed copies to the judge and opposing counsel with the calm efficiency of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. "Your Honor," Victoria said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "Before we address Mr. McLean's petition, there are some irregularities the court needs to see." Dean's confident smile began to fade as Victoria methodically presented his own evidence against him, the hidden financial accounts, the manipulative emails, the strategy sessions with Harrison, the fake receipts and manufactured incidents. And finally, the text messages. "Your Honor," Victoria concluded, her voice sharp, "I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit 15, where Mr. McLean refers to his wife as a pathetic cow and outlines his plan to leave her living in a trailer." The courtroom was dead silent. Dean's face went white, then red, then white again. Harrison looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Judge Patricia Morrison's expression grew colder with each piece of evidence. When Victoria finished her presentation, the judge looked directly at Dean. "Mr. McLean," she said, her voice sharp as broken glass, "would you care to explain these communications?" Dean's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Finally, he managed to stammer, "Wait, this isn't what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like, and everyone in that courtroom knew it. Judge Morrison awarded me temporary custody of the children, temporary possession of the marital home, and froze all of Dean's hidden accounts pending investigation. She also ordered him to undergo a psychological evaluation and referred his case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Dean's carefully crafted exit strategy had become his own destruction. As we left the courthouse, I could hear him frantically arguing with Harrison in the hallway, his voice high with panic. The man who'd called me a pathetic cow was now facing perjury charges, contempt of court, and a federal audit of his finances. I walked out into the Arizona sunshine, feeling lighter than I had in years. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. Dean lost custody, half the assets, and his reputation. He also faced criminal charges for fraud and money laundering. Harrison was sanctioned by the state bar and nearly lost his license. As for me, I kept my job at the veterinary clinic, sold the house in Tucson, and moved to a smaller place near Phoenix, where Victoria had offered me part-time work as a victim advocate. Katie and Ryan adjusted well to our new life, and I began to rebuild the relationships Dean had systematically destroyed. Looking back, I realized that Dean's greatest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was documenting his cruelty so thoroughly that it became impossible to deny. His own words, preserved in digital amber, became the evidence that freed me from 18 years of manipulation and control. I often think about that Tuesday afternoon in October, when I first saw that laptop message. The woman who found those files was still trapped in Dean's web of lies. The woman who walked out of that courthouse 6 months later was someone entirely different, someone who remembered who she'd been before Dean convinced her to doubt everything about herself. The path to freedom had led through the darkest corners of betrayal, but it had taught me that sometimes the people who hurt us most are the ones who inadvertently give us the tools to save ourselves.